every morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're calling in from. This is Susan Downs-Carcos with Welcoming America, and we are so pleased that you're joining us today for this special webinar, which is going to provide a sneak preview of our new toolkit, Neighbors Together, Promising Practices to Strengthen Relations with Refugees and Muslims. I'd like to thank the Office of Refugee Resettlement, whose financial support has made the toolkit possible, as well as today's webinar possible. A little bit about what to expect on our webinar today. We hope that this webinar will give you a better understanding of not only why bringing backlash against refugees and Muslims is important for them, but also why it matters for all Americans. We want to give you a sense of some of the lessons learned from the Neighbors Together toolkit. And then we'll also learn about some very specific strategies that are underway, both in Michigan as well as in Tennessee, ways that experts, leaders in the field are building bridges between diverse Americans. And to get there today, we will have the following agenda. I'll be sharing a little bit of context about why this matters this point of time we're in. We'll then hear from Mavish Hassan, the author of the Neighbors Together Toolkit, who is sharing what she learned in the process of putting that toolkit together. And I'll turn to Nadia Alzain-Tanova from the National Network for Arab American Communities. Nadia will be sharing some of the work that she's been doing, some of the bridge building work that she's been doing, and some advice for others who are trying to do this work. And then we'll hear from Stephanie Tito from the Tennessee Immigrant and Refugee Rights Coalition. And Stephanie will share their work in Tennessee, some of their successes and challenges. And we will have time for questions and comments at the end, so please feel free to chat those in, and we will address just as many of those as we can. And we'll be sending out the toolkit a little later this week, so you'll have a chance to at your leisure and get that sneak preview that we've promised. So what you can expect today on our webinar, and now just to a little bit of context for why this matters, which, you know, the fact that you've all joined our webinar today, I think you all probably know firsthand why this matters and how important this challenge is of building greater understanding between our diverse communities. But I think as we sit here today, I think many of us would agree that one of our greatest challenges right now is the fear and anxiety that many Americans have about Muslims, and we certainly have to acknowledge that, especially after some of the events this weekend in the New York area and in Minneapolis. The fear that people have is very real, but it's all worth noting that fear and distrust of Muslims in the United States and discrimination against them has been something that's been on for decades. It certainly predates the attacks of 9/11 and in part coincides with events like the hostage crisis and the first Iraq War. And U.S.-born African American Muslims in particular have faced a long history of discrimination. And while the receiving community may have a lot of fears right now, certainly the level of fears and concerns among American Muslims themselves about the safety and the future of their families is really at the highest level it's ever been, higher than even in the immediate weeks and months after 9/11. So it's something that we all need to recognize and we all need to be working to overcome. At the time, economic uncertainties in the country and a sense that people are competing with each other have, of course, only made some of these divides grow. I think we've seen that a lot. Election season, and we've seen a phenomenon, kind of this canaries in a coal mine phenomenon, which is in state legislatures. We've seen a handful of legislators trying to advance state anti-Sharia bills, the introduction of which tends to increase negative rhetoric about Muslims and tends to be advanced by some of the same folks who support laws that any receiving community members would also find such as strict voter ID laws or right-to-work legislation. So this is an opportunity for some alliance building with the receiving community. But most importantly of all, and I think something that Welcome America would argue is so critical to this situation is the fact that many Americans, and recent research is telling us 60% of all Americans report have never met a Muslim. Again, 60% report they've never met a Muslim, and very few report knowing very much about the religion. Many Americans may not recognize that most American Muslims were born in the U.S., and if they arrived as immigrants and refugees, they did so in search of the freedoms and opportunities that form our American ethos. But it's important to remember that we stand on the right side of history, that our country's founding principles, including freedom of religion, are as important now as they've ever been. While we witness these challenges, we also see communities welcoming diverse community members and standing with their new neighbors. They are embracing what is next in the work to build inclusive, thriving communities. And more about the practices that are creating this greater understanding and overcoming some of these challenges they're facing, I'd next like to turn it over to Mavish Hassan. Mavish is the author of Neighbors Together, Promising Practices to Strengthen Relations with Refugees and Muslims, and Mavish is a incredible expert on building welcoming communities. She's done work, quite a bit of work across communities in California, and knows this well. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Mavish.
Thank you so much. And also want to just take a minute to thank both Welcoming America as well as the Office of Refugee Settlement for really helping create this space for us to address. Susan mentioned is an ongoing issue, not only in the United States, but internationally as well. Also want to thank the panel of advisors who helped us develop this toolkit, and all on the ground, like yourselves, who took the time to share a story. Before we launch into the toolkit, we love to get a sense of who we, everyone's registered, but just to get a sense of who we have on the webinar with us. So if you don't mind just taking a second to answer the poll question, let us know what your organizational affiliation is, whether with a refugee resettlement organization, with local government, a realization, a social service organization, or some other nonprofit. Great, thank you much. Through this, we will have a sense of look. Most of you are from refugee resettlement organizations. A good number of you from other nonprofits. So we'd love to hear more about the work you're doing and some of what you're facing as we go through this morning's webinar. This is also an opportunity for us to lift up the stories of mutual integration. As Susan mentioned, that the fear really cuts across communities, regardless of whether you're part of the receiving community or refugee or Muslim community member. The stories of mutual integration really reflect how multi-ethnic and socio-economically diverse communities are welcoming refugees and Muslims. And then in turn, how Muslims and refugees are civic participants working to build stronger, more resilient, and welcoming communities. And as we, again, before deeper, would love to get a sense of how each one of you are experiencing the backlash in your community. So if you wouldn't mind responding to this, the next poll question is, how would you describe the climate for refugees in your community? Is it hostile, tolerant, welcoming, or uncertain? Okay, so a lot of responses on tolerant, about percent. 3% you feel like your local climate is hostile to refugees or Muslims, and 2% yay, feel like your local climate is welcoming. And then the uncertain. There's always the uncertain who from the Welcoming America network certainly know well the uncertain. Thank you. The toolkit itself, Neighbors Together, starts with some background information on the issue. It has a section on how to use this toolkit and dives into the actual promising practices that we've heard about. And these promising practices are laid out by whether they're a contact strategy, a communication strategy, or leadership engagement and development strategy. And get-go, I want to state that this is not a complete document. It's a dynamic document, just as the issue, as we've all seen even this past weekend, is a dynamic one. The positive ways that communities and folks like yourselves are working to strengthen relationships between refugees and Muslims is extremely dynamic, and I think you know that better than most other folks. So while bad news is that we continue to experience, whether it's violence or hate, that might magnify this sense of fear and uncertainty in our communities, the news is that we have news stories of local welcoming efforts. And so all to say that this one toolkit does not capture every single story out there. It does close with a resource section that we hope you'll find useful. That includes information on some background and research, as well as promising practices, including links to the Linking Communities project, as well as the Shoulder to Shoulder campaign. It's also a partner piece to Welcoming America's messaging toolkit that launched last week, and some of you might have attended that webinar as well. And that toolkit is Stand Together, messaging about Muslims and refugees in changing times. So what were some of the lessons we learned as we interviewed folks from across the country? All of these are not going to be a huge surprise to any of you. But time and again, I heard that people were able to tap into pre-existing relationships, whether it's in interfaith work or secular work. Those pre-existing relationships were really able to address the recent uptick when that occurred, whether it was a refugee or anti-Muslim sentiment. And you also see it across the varying strategies, this idea of those, investing in the relationship both before the crisis erupts as well as after it passes. And after it passes, we recognize that with limited bandwidth or resources, it might make it tough. But what I also heard was that it was really important to figure out ways to maintain those relationships after the crisis had passed. While the backlash we're talking about is fueled by fear and anxiety about Muslims, refugees, we recognize that this backlash threatens both Muslims as well as folks who people might think are Muslims or refugees. Certainly the Sikh community is a perfect example of that, but it also cuts across to other Arab or African or Middle Eastern descent or South Asian community members. This can really include both long-term residents as well as recent immigrants and refugees. And plus, as Susan referred to the canaries in a coal mine study done by the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding, it's all clear that because this fear and backlash sometimes cuts across communities, it's also a real opportunity for us to invest in multi-ethnic and interfaith alliances. And what is the toolkit is about Unite Oregon, which is an organization that's done a beautiful really connecting the state's urban, suburban, refugees and people of color and immigrants to low-income rural communities. Because in fact, what they realized was they were often facing similar issues. And more about this multi-ethnic alliance building from Nada a little later in the webinar. So heard from numerous communities that working together, actual hands-on working together on a community service project was a great way to both build as well as sustain relationships and have a tangible impact on your community. Examples in the toolkit about community gardens, as well as joint efforts to support newly resettled refugees. And I imagine that each of you can probably list examples from your own experiences as well. Okay. The other section of out of the lesson learned throughout was that it was really important for each to tell your story, to share your stories. And there's multiple ways that can benefit. Of course, it benefits in terms of communications and fundraising for each of you, but it's also an opportunity for us to reach those who are not participating in your programs. And frankly, by sharing your story, you're inspiring others to do the same, and also creating, hopefully, an echo chamber of positive community building efforts that can counter the negative rhetoric that often we feel surrounds us. This is also connected to the next point, helping reframe your message. And I'm going to go into it in great depth because I know, as I mentioned, the messaging webinar on September 8th that some of you might have attended, as well as that toolkit, really tell you a lot more about how to do that, as well as has great stories on reframing and ways to reframe. I have to confess, one of my personal favorites was the example of the honey-made ad that shows Muslim, non-Muslim neighbors getting to know each other really through their daughters. And the other we heard about was using the arts can be a way to make really strong personal connections in unusual ways. We see that through the performing arts, but also, the visual arts. The tool includes stories of art therapy as well as quilting projects that brought groups together to really connect with each other in a very different way. And it also refers to this Enough is Enough campaign, which was created by school students in response to was believed to be was death of one of their fellow students that was believed to be based on a hate crime. So, and you can just get on their website, check that out. It's a great video, actually. To really thinking about leadership engagement, word was that mosques as well as other community organizations can help build a culture of civic engagement in their communities, both by volunteering within as well as building their communities. And the story of Bethel Mal, or the House of Good, which is in St. Louis, Missouri, again, really cool story. It was the result of efforts begun by a couple of police officers that has blossomed into a refugee-led organization that's not helping resettle refugees, but also supporting other low-income residents who are part of the receiving community in the area. And as referred to the Enough is Enough, engaging and learning from youth was yet the piece that several folks talked about. And one of the most concerned impacts of anti-refugee and anti-Muslim rhetoric and bias has been bullying of school-aged children. And so Toolkit does have some stories of efforts by and for young people, and we'll also hear a little bit more about a specific anti-bullying effort from Nadia shortly. The partner institutions that the Toolkit lifts up and range local institutions, including schools, the city, county, police, or bills are involved in a range of these, from making a statement in support of their refugee community members, attending an event or hosting an event, all the way to really thinking about institutionalizing advisory and action committees, as well as training for their staff. So with the Toolkit, I would like to turn it over to Nadia Alzantanova, who's the National Director at the Network for Arab American Communities. So she will tell us a little bit about what her organization has been up to on the ground.
Thank you so much, Mavish, and thank you for having me on the webinar this afternoon. I want to say a quick thing to Welcoming America and to the Office of Refugee Settlement for putting together this amazing toolkit. I think we all know how important it is right now for us to be working across communities to ensure that Arab, Muslim, and refugee communities are being fully integrated and welcomed into their neighbors and their communities. The work has largely stemmed within the Arab American community. I work with the National Network for Arab American Communities. Our parent organization is Access. We're based here in Dearborn, Michigan, and we work with independent nonprofits all over the country. We have 24 member organizations in 12 states, and they are grassroots organizations that are doing the real work on the ground. So a couple of years ago, what we did along with our member organizations was we actually traveled the country talking with folks about what was some of the most pressing issues that were facing them and how we could help them with that. And one of the things that we heard in every single meeting that we did across the country was Islamophobia and backlash against Muslim Americans and, as Mavish spoke about, everyone perceived to be Muslim, which includes the Arab American community at large. And so we designed a campaign called Our Campaign to Take on Hate. And we originally designed it to be a national grassroots campaign that challenges prejudice and bigotry facing Arab and Muslim Americans. And so very much is the intent of the campaign. What we quickly realized as we were starting to plan and to form this campaign and started doing some initial work on the ground is that there was absolutely no way that we could challenge the prejudice and bigotry facing our communities without engaging in deep bridge building across all different communities of color, across the receiving communities that we were living in, and really just reaching out to engage a whole host of partners at the local level and at the national level to make sure that we were successful and that we were uplifting equality and the values that we wanted for our community, for all communities of color. And this also really looked at how we as Americans are showing up to shape the type of society that we want for all communities. And so we have a lot of work also around how Arab Americans can be better allies across communities, because we feel that we won't be successful until we do that. So here are with you two examples of how that work has played out within our campaign. This is some anti-bullying and leadership development work that we have done in New York. Now, as I mentioned, the work that we're doing is national in scope, and so one of the key cities that we are working in is New York City, and the Arab American Association of New York is anchoring the work there and is our main partner. We also have several other partners, including the Arab American Family Support Center that we work with. One of the things that the Arab American Association of New York has been doing has been hosting trainings for students in New York City public schools about how they can handle bullying in their schools and how they can develop the leadership skills that's necessary to work among students, their fellow students within their schools and within their school districts, to tackle bullying and to tackle contemporary social justice issues such as Islamophobia. And so they've trained over 1,000 diverse students. There's certainly are training many students beyond just Arab American students. They've even had a few sessions for New York City school teachers, but the large majority of the work has been done with the students, and they actually go in and just talk with them about the different issues. They talk with them about the basics of organizing. They talk to them about how to handle bullying, how to work within their school, and how to with other students across various ethnic, racial, identities, religious identities, to be able to put a stop to bullying in their schools. And we've seen a lot of success with this type of work, and a lot of youth that then will engage with us further, and actually volunteer for some of the other organizing work that we're doing. Another example of our work is something actually launched here in Michigan in partnership with the Muslim Anti-Racism Collaborative, which is a series of events that we're calling our Race Identity Series. It's actually a 6-part series where people throughout Metro Detroit can come together and talk about race and identity in a really friendly, fun, and interactive way. And so we have covered a variety of topics, including Racism 101, Identity and Privilege, Overcoming Implicit Bias. We have the next one on Thursday, which we're actually talking about microaggressions. They're very serious topics, but we do it in a very approachable way so that people can begin to think about these topics in new ways. They're very introductory level courses, and so sometimes people have not spent any time talking about these issues before, but are able to put it in context of their own experience and really have a lot of time to talk with one another. And as you'll see from some of the pictures, the groups that we're getting out for this are very, very diverse. They cut across racial and ethnic and religious lines, and that's been really successful for us because it's getting people in our community, diverse groups of people, to come together and talk about very serious issues and about their own experiences, and then about how they might be able to come together to address some of the things that are happening across Metro Detroit and be allies working for social justice and for equality. So if you know more about our work, please follow us. You can find us on our website, nac.org, or takeonhate.org. Follow us on all the social media, and we have several events coming up here in Michigan if you're a part of that. But we'd certainly love to connect with you nationally as well, so we can talk about that offline. And right now, I am going to turn it over to Stephanie Tito, who's going to talk with you about her experiences in Tennessee.
Nadia. So yes, my name's Stephanie Tito, and I am with the Tennessee Immigrant and Refugee Rights Coalition based in Nashville. I also wanted to thank Susan and Mesh for the opportunity to share our story today. I'm very impressed and inspired by many of the models that are detailed in the toolkit, and so grateful for Welcoming America for compiling them all for us. So like many communities that are likely represented on the call, Tennessee feels like it's very much on the front lines of the anti-refugee backlash, and there are countless efforts at the local and state level to erode support for refugee resettlement and to actually legislatively undermine, fund, and even end the program. So we've been experiencing the backlash against refugees that's now sweeping the country for quite a few years. And so for my piece on today's webinar, I wanted to share how we've responded to anti-refugee legislation with campaigns that both in our communities and shift our climate. I'll start with just a bit of Tennessee context for you and then dig into an example from this year's legislative session. So one of America's fastest growing immigrant populations in the country. I'm sure there's many other new gateway cities on the phone today. And so it's really to say that, 20 years ago, we didn't really have very many immigrants in our state at all. And now there are more than 100,000. So although that number is maybe small compared to where some of you live, that rapid rate of growth has really presented challenges and opportunities as residents, U.S.-born Tennesseans have really processed those shifts. And so there's been many, many, many public figures who had an opportunity to seize on people's sort of natural anxieties and questions and even fears about demographic shifts and really advanced a lot of anti-refugee platforms. And similarly, some national organizations found fertile ground in Tennessee for their policy agendas and some willing partners in our legislature. So we've actually been a bit of a testing ground for some dangerous policy proposals. So by way of example, in 2011, our state legislature debated an Sharia bill, and communities were organizing in opposition to the construction of the Murfreesboro Mosque. But at the same time, two legislators filed the first bill that we had seen that targeted refugees explicitly by their status. And so this bill was called the Refugee Absorptive Capacity Act. It would have allowed local governments to pass moratoriums on resettlement. And that bill, although it passed Tennessee in 2011, was actually introduced in legislatures across the country. So all to say the backlash is not new, but communities in Tennessee have really by and large succeeded in marginalizing that movement and defeating most of the anti-refugee bills that have been introduced since 2011. But like many of you in your communities, after the attacks in Paris last November, the backlash against refugees was essentially mainstreamed. Our governor joined nearly 30 others in calling for the suspension of Syrian resettlement, and one legislator pictured here even called for the bringing up and detaining of in the country already. And so this year, in January of 2016, we actually saw a total of 6 anti-refugee bills introduced, and the most sweeping and the only one to pass was this resolution to sue the federal government in an effort to end refugee resettlement by challenging the underpinnings of the program. And so the resolution, when it was introduced, it really had significant momentum. 25 of our 33 senators were co-sponsors. And so although the resolution ultimately passed and the lawsuit has yet to be filed, we were, the campaign itself can offer some lessons on how communities can rebuild support for resettlement, strengthen relationships, the public narrative, even through more defensive and reactive campaign work. And so, of course, there are many, many stories and tactics to share from some of our legislative advocacy work. I'll highlight just a few here that speak to some of the key strategies of the Neighbors Together toolkit, but I am very happy to talk with anyone offline about other pieces of work if you're seeing similar legislation introduced in your state. At the beginning of the legislative session, when the resolution was introduced, like I said, there was overwhelming support. So our coalition of refugee resettlement agencies and refugee serving organizations really decided to invest in strategic communications to shift the public narrative and understood and shift the ways that communities were understanding the push for the lawsuit. And so our goal was that even if we couldn't beat the resolution, how could we use the public debate to tell our story about the life-saving work of refugee resettlement, about the many, many communities who support and value the program, and to help people better understand a program that was being questioned. And so just a few quick examples. Some of our partners in the refugee resettlement agencies developed a Refugee Resettlement 101 presentation that they offered several times throughout the session, which provided factual information about the program and a place for Tennesseans to get their questions answered. And knowing that the media would be dominated throughout the session with stories about the costs of refugee resettlement or about national security, we also really worked to place stories that humanized refugees and spotlighted the real welcoming spirit of our community. So, for example, many human interest pieces that told the stories of refugees living in Tennessee, as well as a story at a local church who had opened up their space for English classes and other services to help new families. And so just as we worked to shift the public narrative throughout the campaign, it was also very important for us to create opportunities for Tennesseans to express their support and welcome. So like you, when our governor called for a suspension of resettlement, there was really an outpouring of support, U.S.-born Tennesseans. And so we wanted to create many and sort of an outlet for them. So we organized vigils, collected thousands of petition signatures, made it easy for folks to send messages to their legislators, invited people to come out to committee meetings, and also creating an opportunity for other champions. So you can see on the screen an op-ed by a local pastor of a very large church here in Nashville placed an op-ed urging the governor to veto the resolution. Our local mayors spoke in support of refugees, and one even urged the governor to veto it as well. And lastly, the most effective advocates for the refugee resettlement program are refugees themselves. So throughout the session, we created opportunities for their own stories and answer legislators' questions. So seeing three of our members meeting with a legislator before a committee meeting. In addition to meeting with them, we also remember that refugees could offer testimony during committee hearings, and that Refugee Voices were featured prominently in the media coverage. And so that image on the left is one of our members, Anwar, who's a very recent refugee from Iraq, who shared his story during the period between when the legislature had passed the resolution and while our governor was deciding whether or not he might veto it. And here we are now, although the resolution did pass, and are waiting the General Assembly to hire a law firm. Most recently, our governor out publicly in support of the refugee settlement program, although around this time last year, he had joined others in calling for a suspension after meeting with refugee resettlement agencies, hearing the stories of refugees and learning more. He has recently said that he actually supports the program, trusts the vetting process, and has no problem with refugees and especially Syrians being resettled. So we know that it's working. And so I'll end it there, but I just wanted to mention that we've detailed our experience countering anti-refugee and anti-Muslim policy in a report that you can find on our website. And I'm happy to answer any more specific questions, but the sort of key takeaway is that the proactive work of strengthening relationships between communities, building support for refugee resettlement, it's not just preventative work. And so even if you feel like many of us do in Tennessee that we're sort of constantly putting out fires and playing defense, there are still many ways to engage in that defense of the program in ways that make your community stronger in the end. So thanks again, and I will I pass it back to Mavish.
Thank you. So still on mute. Thanks, Stephanie. And that the Countering the Backlash toolkit that Stephanie mentioned from Tennessee is also one of the resources that's listed and linked on the toolkit. So thanks to both you and Stephanie for really giving us a glimpse of both the challenges as well as your inspiring efforts to address these challenges. Move towards the close. We would love to again hear from you. Again, each of you are the experts on the ground. We'd love to get a sense of what backlash issues are that you're facing in your community. And just take a minute or so to respond to these two questions. What issues are you facing in your community? And in a category, we'd love to see your response. That as well. If it's not bullying in schools, legislative actions that are anti-refugee, and increase in crime. And if it's the response, we'd love to hear from you. To get all of those responses in to get a sense of what the issues are that you're facing. There's a number of questions bubbling up. So I'm going to very quickly just say that there is a section end of the toolkit that really talks about strategies to adapt this for your local context. And there's a number of key things that it suggests that you consider. A couple things that I'd want to lift up is, and we said it again and again today, is really acknowledging the fear and uncertainty experienced by all groups as you're thinking about how you might adapt some of these strategies. And to the extent possible, really modeling authentic and ethical partnering with refugee and Muslim communities. And again, to the extent possible, if you can, connect your local efforts to regional, state, and national networks so they can share your lessons and really help broaden the impact of your work. Second piece is really share your story, and we have a link here on welcomingrefugees.org for you to share your story so that we can continue updating the dynamic toolkit with the work you're doing. One of the things that I heard time and again as I spoke to folks on the ground was the challenge of how do we sustain these efforts. And I want to recognize that projects do come to an end. But as you discover practices that work for a project, if there's a way that you can figure out how to embed some of those practices into your ongoing work, it could be as simple as really having out of a whole new venue to host an event, or thinking about including new partners that you can continue to engage even once the project ends. And other ideas from each of you on a promising practice within a project that you would like to continue to in your organization's work. And hand it back to Susan for questions, but just recap in terms of issues that you shared. About 17% stated that you are trying to address state legislative policies. 14% responded that bullying in schools is an issue in your local community, and 7% that there was an increase in crime. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to Susan so that we can begin to respond to some of your questions.
Thanks, Mavish. This is your opportunity, audience. Please type in your questions, your comments. Let's get a virtual conversation going here. I'm going to go ahead and kick off with this first question around how the toolkit and your work, Stephanie and Nadia, how does it address the fact that most Americans haven't met Muslim? Maybe we can first from Mavish, sort of the big picture, but also Stephanie, I'd love to hear from you because it strikes me that, Nashville's well known for being such a welcoming city, and yet when you get outside of Nashville, I imagine fewer people know a Muslim, and you have a lot of legislature who are hearing from their constituents concerns around Muslims. So how is it that we can overcome that dynamic? Mavish, do you want to kick it off with this?
I'm happy to. And the toolkit actually does share a number of stories that we heard about, and those range all the way from Muslim neighbor to that's happening across different state lines at coffee shops and libraries and other public spaces, to our Muslim Neighbor Initiative, which is based in Tennessee. So there's definitely a number of fairly local efforts to make those connections. And I think a piece of it, what I heard from folks was the sovereignty to work together, whether it was in a community garden in Boise, Idaho, for what period of time that garden is active, was really an opportunity to get to know someone in an authentic way. So there's certainly examples of that. But let Nadia and Stephanie add to that.
Stephanie, I can jump in. And so I think a few ways that I would share. So Maj mentioned Our Muslim Neighbor, which is a great initiative here in Tennessee that's been around for a few years, who, really core mission is bringing interfaith communities together to get to know, as their name suggests, their new Muslim neighbors. And so two ways that they do that, and I believe they're detailed in the toolkit, is through a community dinner model and really bringing people together for conversations over food, as well as sort of larger events. Partnering with our Metro Human Relations Commission to host an annual and very large community iftar during Ramadan to help the broader community not only understand Ramadan, but also to, again, facilitate kind of community building conversations over dinner. And then for us, as you said, especially in some areas outside of Nashville and the larger cities where the population of refugees and Muslims is much smaller, really being intentional about creating spaces to answer people's questions and to bring people together. And so one of the ways we do that most frequently is actually through community-based presentations, which are part of our Welcoming Tennessee initiative, where we go to churches in rural areas with our members and create sort of a low anxiety space for people to get their questions answered and to get to meet new people, as well as sort of larger strategies of telling stories in the media and having refugees and Muslims themselves tell their stories through those channels. And then, of course, with legislators through Days on the Hill and one-on-one legislative visits, and inviting them to come to the mosque or to come to community events and sort of see for themselves.
And this is not, I would definitely agree with all that's been said, and we've used some of those tactics. The other thing I would add is that if you're interested in particularly advocacy work around some social justice issues, one way that we have been able to address those issues by just really bringing people together and saying, let's talk about relationships between our communities. Let's talk about what this is like, and let's share experiences of what we experienced, what you have experienced. How have we not shown up for you, and what are the things that you need, and what are the things that we need, and just really create a very safe space to be able to have some difficult conversations, and just be clear up front that we're creating a very safe space for people that want to come together to learn from one another in a very open-minded way, because with the express intention of getting past some of the challenges that we faced and figuring out how we can work together.
Now, a follow-up question for you. One of the audience members has asked to learn a little bit more about the friendly and fun ways that you address racism in some of your workshops. Can you share a little bit more about that? I think we're all intrigued.
Sure. So, with the Race Identity series, we have made it very intentional to make it as inviting of a space as possible. So even paying very close attention to things like ambiance, having artists there that can share music when people are walking in, have, decorations. We split up the group people right when they come in by assigning them tables, so that we're kind of forcing them to sit randomly with new people, and then we incorporate a lot of fun ways for them to get to know one another. At the last one, what we did was kind of like a picture booth where people could go, and we encourage them to take pictures with their new friends and kind of share something that they learned with one another. And so just really trying to make it about relationship building before we get into the topic, and then during as well. Normally we have a bit of a period where people can just be getting to know one another. We introduce the topic, we have an exercise, then a lot of times we'll do an intermission where we might have some more art present, some more relationship building activities, let people get food and talk over dinner, and then do another learning exercise on that topic at the end before people go home. So by breaking it up in that way and creating some fun activities throughout the program, it just gives people that ability to build relationships in a non-threatening way and to share their stories.
Sounds like it works really well. Let's talk a little bit about coloration around these kinds of issues. How do you inspire collaboration and greater community impact across nonprofits? I mean, clearly to be most effective, you need collaboration, but in a lot of communities, nonprofits are really, competing, that's the right word, competing for scarce resources. In your experience, what's worked to really inspire collaboration instead of competition?
So I think, of course, long-term relationship building helps, right, in terms of understanding what are the strengths and assets of different organizations, and in our case, of course, crisis in terms of bringing people together. And so, last November, when we really saw the backlash against refugees really kind of reach a fever pitch, we began having really regular meetings with all of the refugee resettlement agencies, as well as different refugee serving organizations who, through kind of sharing our kind of analysis on what needs to happen, and recognize that there's many strategies and many needs, and identifying the strengths of some groups to, like I said, do those sort of refugee resettlement 101 presentations, or and our Muslim neighbor who focuses really on those interfaith dialogues. And so it's not easy, of course, but we just spent a lot of time talking about the breadth of kind of needs and how strategies can really complement each other, and that there's no sort of single strategy here, but that we're probably most effective when we work together. And so we've seen a lot of success there.
Great. Oh, quickly? Yes.
I was going to say quickly, I think some of the ways that we've been able to build partnerships too is by starting with, maybe one specific program. So, you don't always have to start by talking about partnering all sorts of different things. Start small and be able to build from there.
That's so. I have some other comments and questions that are coming in that I'm going to go through fairly quickly in the interest of time. The first is, we've already had a new promising practice come in. So as Mavish said, this tool not, it's not static, and we'd love to hear your examples. Kathy is the founder and director of DC Rally for Refugees, which took place in DC on August 28th, and she's starting work on a joint house party campaign where people can have a gathering at their house. A speaker, whether that's a refugee or a volunteer, or organizational rep, who will talk about the refugee situation and then have a discussion with topics suggested and tools. And Kathy asked if we know of other groups that are currently doing something like this that may want to partner. Rather than to do that, listen to that right now, I just ask folks, if you know of people who might want to partner on something like that, just chat that in so we can get it to Kathy. But it sounds like a great idea, Kathy, and we look forward to learning more about it and profiling it. We all had a question about, does refugee resettlement work? Someone who's trying to deepen their collaboration and is getting some questions around how do we know that it really works. And what I would say to that is one resource that's out there, a fairly new research study, is the Colorado RISE project, ISE. The Colorado State Department of Human Services commissioned a study, and it's a longitudinal study following refugees for 5 years to see how they did. And it was a lot of good news. They certainly were employed, and they were certainly integrating into their communities and developing a lot of bonds. So I should check out I think if you Google Colorado State Refugee Services Program, you should be able to find the Colorado Rise study, and I'm sure there are many more, but that is one is so timely and new. We're getting a lot of questions about the toolkit, so please know that it is going to be on the Welcoming Refugees website, and you will also be getting a special sneak peek this week with an email. Oh, I'm actually told later today. So you're going to be getting a copy of this toolkit today, and you'll be able to look through it at your leisure. I think we've run out of time for questions, and we have a couple of really important announcements that we share with you. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Stephanie because there's a great opportunity to continue the conversation that we just started today. And Stephanie, share more.
We are so excited to be hosting the 9th Annual National Immigrant Integration Conference this December in Nashville. Many of you might have been there last year in New York City. And so this year we're really excited to share more of the story by a little bit about today. And so not only will there be an entire track of workshops led by Susan and Nadia and many other folks around receiving community strategy, but we'll also have, for the first time, an entire track of workshops dedicated to refugee resettlement and advocacy. And then, of course, that you may be more familiar with from previous years, including around English language acquisition and workforce development. And so we're very excited and hope to see you in Nashville. We do have early bird registration until September 30th. There's lots of information on the website, and more about the program will be posted later this month, but it'll be a great opportunity to continue these conversations and look ahead after the election for our next year of work together.
Great. Thanks, Stephanie. We hope to see as many of you on this webinar there as possible. I'll turn it over to Hannah for a few more announcements.
So one resource that we have for you, if you weren't on our webinar last week, is to stand together a toolkit on messaging around anti-Muslim backlash. So you will also find that on our website at welcomingrefugees.org. And then it's also a really exciting week for Welcoming America. It's our annual Welcoming Week, and this is a week when communities host events to bring together immigrants and U.S.-born residents in a spirit of unity, and also to raise awareness about the benefits of welcoming everyone. So we have people all over the country participating in events. We have hundreds of these events listed on our website at welcomingweek.org. I love getting the chance to attend these events because I leave having met other community members and feeling really inspired and uplifted. So we'd have you join us at an event in your area sometime this week. And another opportunity for you to get involved is our Welcoming Refugees Forum. The benefits of the forum that you would be able to engage in special discussions before and after our webinars. You would have access to Welcoming America staff to ask us questions about particular issues that you're experiencing in your community. You'll also get to network with other people who work in resettlement agencies, and you'll get early peeks at new resources and a space to share successes and challenges and welcoming with each other. We'd love to have you join. All you have to do is fill out an interest form at bit.ly/WR forum. I will turn it back over to Susan.
And thank you to everyone who was part of our webinar today, to Mavish for her incredible work on the toolkit, for Leah and Stephanie for the incredible examples they're setting in their communities, and for Hannah for doing all that it takes to make these toolkits and webinars possible. And we're so glad that all of you were able to join us. We look forward to continuing the conversation. Please take a look at these toolkits and give us your feedback. What was helpful? Are there things that are missing? We want to make sure we're helping meet your needs as you're out there doing the tremendous work that you do in your communities. So with that, we're going to sign off. We hope you have a wonderful week, a happy welcoming week, and we look forward to working together in the months ahead. Take care and goodbye.